The average Malawian makes $1.28 a day, $600 a year. And certainly there is a huge opportunity for industrial hemp to be part of that solution, not only to provide food for those people, but to create industry.
That's Geoff Whaling from the National Hemp Association, and this is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. Hello there, my name is Eric Herlock, and today I will be talking to Geoff about his recent trip to Malawi and Rwanda in Southeast Africa, a trip funded by the USDA to identify barriers to exporting American hemp into these countries. We'll hear about the trip, we'll hear about hemp, we'll hear about the barriers, all that and more. But first, a few words from our sponsors. This week's episode is brought to you by I&D Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. I&D Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company that is bringing new opportunities to American farmers. Learn more at indhemp.com. This week's show is also made possible with support from King's Agri-Seeds, who want to remind you that the best time to source your spring hemp seed with the best price is right now. And so you'll want to call Sarah Mitchell at King's. Give her a call, 717-327-6188. And while you're on the phone with Sarah, ask her about King's Soil Builder Plus cover crop to boost your hemp yields in 2025. KingsAgriSeeds.com. And full disclosure, our show over the years has been sponsored by the National Hemp Association. And our guest today, Geoff Whaling, is the chair of that organization. All right, before we get into my conversation with Geoff from the National Hemp Association, I want to talk about something from last week's show. Yeah, the white deer. Steve Groff saw a white deer, and we talked about it on last week's show, and I got a lot of mileage out of that. Like, there's some part of me, spiritual, mystical, playful. I really just enjoyed this idea of the white deer appearing before Steve on his journey. Was there some kind of significance to the deer? Right? Was the deer sort of sending Steve on some kind of mystical quest? Or was the deer a sign, like a symbol of hope for the emerging fiber and grain sector? Yeah, all of those things. Yes, I want all of those things to be true all at once. And, I've said it before, I'm a simpleton. I'm an optimist. I think it's great. I love that he saw a white deer. And that was enough for me. Seriously, Steve saw a deer. End of story. I love it. But the story of the white deer starts back in 1941 when the U.S. Army founded the Seneca Army Depot for munitions storage during World War II, chosen for its strategic and isolated location. And they put a fence around 10,000 acres for this weapons depot. I got an email from Larry Smart up at Cornell, who he grew up in that region, and obviously he works up there, but he said there's a long history of the Army managing the white deer on the Seneca Army Depot. They are not albino, but are piebald. They do not have pigment in their eyes and can have some shades of brown at times of the year. It's a single gene recessive mutation, so the white deer were maintained as a population trapped inside the fence. He says that the land is now managed by a tourist company. It's called Deer Haven Park, and sometimes the deer do jump the fence and they get out, and you can see them on adjacent farms, he says, but they don't last long outside the fence. But there's more to this Seneca Army Depot than just the white deer. So during the Cold War, the U.S. Army stockpiled nuclear weapons here, right? Just, quietly sticking warheads up there in the Finger Lakes. It was the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in North America at one time, from what I read. And at the height of the Cold War, in 1983, it becomes the site of a protest encampment. A group of fearless women formed the Seneca Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace and Justice. It was a women-only peace camp formed to protest the scheduled deployment of cruise and Pershing II missiles before their suspected shipment from the Seneca Army Depot to Europe in the fall of 1983. Thousands of women came to participate and rally against nuclear weapons and the patriarchal society that created and used those weapons. So yeah, a whole lot more to the story than just Steve saw a deer. I'm really glad he did, because, when Steve sees something, there's a chance we're all going to learn from it. And maybe there's lessons to be learned here about diversity, like just how diversity in soil is super important. Diversity in your deer genetics is important for a healthy population. Diversity is important. All right, I'm climbing down off of my soapbox, and we'll get into our conversation with Geoff Whaling. Geoff Whaling, Chair of the National Hemp Association. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Nice to be here.
Good. Could you give us a quick reintroduction, remind people of who you are and what you do?
I ask myself that often. What do I do? Geoff Whaling, I am the volunteer chair of the National Hemp Association. Had this role for 8 years. And as people will know, the National Hemp Association has been around for 10 years. Started out as the Colorado Hemp Organization, and then we moved to becoming the National Hemp Association and moved its offices to Washington, where we've been for the last 8 years. And we're considered the largest grassroots hemp advocacy group in the world, now with standing committees for state hemp organization representing 20 or 25 state hemp organizations, standing committee on social equity, and now the standing committee of international hemp organizations with 14 or 15 international organizations participating on that platform.
All right, so you have a lot of spare time, clearly. No, I mean, like, you're super busy is what I mean by that.
Yeah, well, you know what? I love what I do, so I don't see it as consuming of time, and we're trying to help everybody, and that's what we need to do at this stage of this emerging industry.
Cool. And I will just point out that it was on July 11th, 2018, just over 6 years ago, that you granted me my first interview for this podcast. So I learned a lot from you in those early days. You sort of gave me like the full download at the time. So appreciate that.
And you know what, if we went back and listened to that, I'm sure that a lot of the things that we talked about are still the same things that we're working on.
Yeah, well, so the last time we saw each other was at the Lancaster County Hemp Circuit. What were your thoughts on that event?
Well, I think from my perspective, obviously, to be able to present 15, 16 different varietals in a field to demonstrate to USDA, both the rural development as well as FAS group for the first time, to have them both come to stand in the field and to see the work of everyone in this industry so that they could really kind of see the challenges, meet the players, but also go back and look at ways that they could help our industry, was a huge achievement. Steve Groff and his team, the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council, did a great job in presenting that event. I was happy to participate, although, I was really focused on departing the next day for Africa.
Oh, I didn't realize you were leaving that soon. We'll talk about your Africa trip here in a little bit. You anticipated my question about the USDA there. Betsy Londrigan was there, and talk a little bit more about why it was important that she was there.
Well, I think that we hear from our members, what is USDA doing? How can we get help? We need money. Where are their sources of funding? And I think that USDA rural development is part of that solution. And specifically, Betsy has just come on as the new administrator. She is the former Illinois State Rural Development Director. But for her to take on this role, I think it was great for her not only to, as one of her first priorities, come and visit the hemp industry, but also to talk about the 22, 23 programs under her responsibility. And I'm not sure if I'm correct in this, but I think that those programs total about $4 billion worth of funding. And certainly she now knows what the hemp industry is doing. And now I hope that many of the participants of that event now know that they can start to look to rural development. I've already had a couple of people approach me already. And Betsy's team have been great in responding almost instantly to the requests that are coming from our members. That in itself is a major achievement.
Yeah, that's great. So connections were made. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gave a presentation about the Farm Bill and whether or not we can see one this year. Talk about some of the main takeaways from your talk there.
Well, and certainly, it is a work in progress. Obviously, we've all been working on updating the 2018 Farm Bill, hopeful that we were going to have a Farm Bill in 2023. So we moved forward and saw successfully the language from the Industrial Hemp Act of 2023, introduced by Senator Braun and Chester. That base language go into the House version of the Farm Bill draft. They made some improvements upon that language. They've added microgreens into the definition of industrial hemp, but they've also met our ask to remove testing, but also gave states the rights where they wanted to have testing, states the rights to opt in or opt out of those programs. So we, I think, had a nice giant leap moving forward to bifurcate fiber and grain from cannabinoid hemp and new rules. The draft language of the Senate bill is similar, but then there was the onset of the Miller Amendment, which is proposing to redefine hemp away from what is currently in the 2018 Farm Bill. We're not sure that Congressman Miller really understands the implication of that. So we've been working since that was introduced in the House version to educate members on the challenges that it would have for the industry and the unforeseen consequences if that language, that amendment passes. I think that we're going to get, because the Senate Ag Farm Bill has not been released yet. We have had updates from Senator Braun's staff on where it's going. We continue to have support for our Industrial Hemp Act of 2023 language moving forward, but we're now working with Senator Wyden and Schumer who are both trying to move industrial hemp legislation forward to make sure that the Miller Amendment, the goal of the Miller Amendment, which is to frame intoxicants differently than fiber and grain, we're going to make sure that language doesn't move forward to affect fiber and grain.
Okay. Last week, California Governor Newsom was making some noise about the hemp industry and like shame on the hemp industry for not policing itself, and letting the intoxicating cannabinoids get to the market, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on what Governor Newsom is saying there?
Well, Eric, it is like many of the other governors who are now, trying to deal with the intoxicants coming in the marketplace. I think that, we have consistently at NHA kind of remained neutral in this discussion. But as this has progressed, we have been a little more vocal about reminding people that it may be legal to grow cannabinoid hemp, courtesy of the 2018 Farm Bill. It's just not lawful, and it has never been lawful to sell those end products in the retail marketplace. Add to it, the reason that Congresswoman Miller and others are introducing the legislation that they're doing is that as adult use marijuana is coming into effect in some states, they are dealing with the reality that people who are in the marijuana space, who have applied for licenses, who have invested millions of dollars into those applications, who have received approvals to proceed, who are then required under very strict rules of building facilities to grow marijuana and then to sell it, and certainly pay a significant amount of money for those permits, millions, and to start paying taxes on the products that they're selling. They're confronted with the hemp industry that is allowed to, or at least is advancing products that are THC based, and not having to go through the same process. I know it is challenging for those that are in the Delta 8, Delta 10 and intoxicant space to understand that, but that's the reality. So again, I remind people, the 2018 Farm Bill, despite what others may say, allowed for cannabinoid hemp to be grown. It just did not give permission, make those end products lawful, because the FDA has not ruled. Again, we at NHA have kind of led. We were the first group to ever meet with the FDA prior to the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. We heard them loud and clear. We are in the process of working with the FDA again on that legislative framework that they're seeking, which at the end of the day will help advance our industry, not only for cannabinoids, but for all of the other minor cannabinoids that will be coming to the market. And there could be another 140, 150 of them. And FDA wants a framework to allow them to address them all.
Right. And that's exciting that there's that much potential there in that, cannabinoidal space. I would argue that that's not hemp, right? Like, I think however much there's a regulatory solution here, I think a lot of this has to be sort of solved linguistically. Like, I wish we could just sort of take the word hemp and have it mean what we know it means, and not get into that messy, chemical compound area, because that to me feels more like medicinal cannabis.
Oh, you're a smart guy. You know what I want to talk about on my recent visit to Africa, where I came up with the new name for our commodity.
Oh, all right. Well, let's get there. You recently got back from a trip to Africa. You were, I think, in Malawi, which is in Southeast Africa. So tell me about the nature and sort of the goals of the trip, and then we can talk about if it was successful.
Yeah, so we have not ever applied for USDA funding. But it seems that, if you don't have a USDA logo attached to some of the work that you're doing, it's that seal of approval. So we decided that we would apply for an EMP grant, which is Emerging Market Program. And we're successfully awarded to focus on 3 areas, and that was Malawi, Rwanda, and Ghana. And the purpose of that was to really undertake a review and to report back to USDA as to the barriers for exporting American-grown hemp products into those 3 countries. I visited Malawi and Rwanda on this trip. It's a 14-hour flight to get to Kenya from New York, and then you carry on from there another 2 and a bit hours to get into Malawi. I had the pleasure of meeting the president of Malawi 2 years ago at the United Nations. In fact, his group sought me out. He was about to declare hemp to be a commodity of importance to his nation. We've had numerous discussions over the last 2 years with his team, and I went to kind of see for myself what was going on and how we could help advance that market. The work that they have undertaken, and as I discussed with the president, they have put together what we in the United States have been asking for, which is a whole of government approach to hemp. I met with not only government officials and elected officials and people from the president's team. I met with their economic development team, their universities, their growers, and others who are advancing industrial hemp. And they've done an amazing job. I think that with a few regulatory changes, they will be able to attract capital to this industry. And in the meantime, start to work with those in the United States who can bring technology and products to that marketplace. It is shocking to go from the lives that we all lead in North America to Malawi, where as I was driving from the airport to downtown, mile after mile after mile of roadside stands that consisted of really a line that was attached to 2 sticks. where people were showcasing the offerings of the day, which principally were rats and mice that they had captured in the field, and they were offering them up for food. The average Malawian makes $1.28 a day, $600 a year. And certainly there is a huge opportunity for industrial hemp to be part of that solution, not only to provide food for those people, but to create industry. I told the president that they have the potential of being the model not only for their own country, but for the south of Africa, and potentially for the entire continent. They're ready to go. They're ready to learn. They are already, they've advanced regulations for both human consumption and animal feed, both for import and export. And it's just a question of, working with small stakeholder farmers. Most of those are farmers that, grow 2 to 5 acres. That may sound impossible, but if you can imagine, they have created a cooperative in Malawi that has some 110,000 small acre farmers who are producing about 350 tons of tobacco today. And as we all know, people who were tobacco farmers in this country generationally earlier planted hemp. Can we do that same thing? I think that model is there. And certainly they can learn from, Americans on technology and all of that. And I had the great pleasure of meeting one of the producers there, uber excited but successful. Her name is Tanya. And so that's the new name that I think we should be calling hemp, particularly in Africa. We should be calling this commodity Tanya.
Tanya. Okay. Yeah. We'll make a note there.
Kind of sounds a little African, but she's done an amazing job. She is in the cannabis industry, both on the marijuana side as well as hemp. And like many in our industry here, she's doing all things, anything from grain to feed to hempcrete building blocks. She's showcasing it all. I saw her products in the stores in Malawi. And you know what? It was no different than what we were seeing here in the United States. I saw her later on when I was in Rwanda at the food security meeting, and she was part of the group that was trying to raise money. So again, same sort of problems that we have here, but the opportunities seem to be a little more advanced.
All right. Hold on. So tell me who this Tanya woman is, and she must have had a huge impact on you if you now want to rename the entire commodity crop after her.
Yeah, I think that, we've heard over and over and over and over and over again. And when I get to talk about Rwanda, I'll tell you, the challenges. But they're no different than they are here. So I don't need to repeat it. But it was, people would giggle and people would laugh. And they're like, wow, we didn't know. And
they call it Shamba over there, right?
They do call it Shamba. And I just thought, here is somebody who, has really staked her future on this commodity. And she's done very, very well on her own. And, she's literally planted the hemp seed in Malawi. And she works in South Africa, and she works in a couple other countries as well. But she's kind of making her way. And I just thought, wow, you know what? We need to differentiate hemp fiber and grain from cannabinoid, from THC. What can we call it? We've all been, I'm used to telling the story about rapeseed. And many people don't know the story of rapeseed, but rapeseed is a commodity of significance in Europe and in Canada and the United States. But the name rapeseed just
doesn't have a good ring to it.
No. So, I go to my Canadian roots, and I'll give credit to the Canadian Oil Association. And they came up with a new name for it, and they called it canola. And so we're all familiar with canola, Canadian Oil Association. It kind of went nicely with who they were. But we do need to come up with a new name.
I would argue that we already have the perfect name in English. It's hemp. That's what it is. Like, I think it's the folks there who are saying that, oh no, our CBD stuff, extracted from hemp, but once that's not hemp anymore. So I don't know. I think after 6 years of talking to people about this, I'm ready to fight people. Not you.
Well,
not
I
you.
think,
I'm not going to fight you, Geoff.
I think we, and I take responsibility because I had a seat at the table. We went along in the 2018 Farm Bill of removing the word industrial, and we just called it hemp. And I think what people now see, and I just finished talking to a group in New Jersey, they've got the same problem. When they talk about hemp, most people talk about CBD and the challenges that the farmers had. We need to incorporate something to bring back that industrial side, because that is essentially 98% of the opportunity that we have.
Yeah.
And how do we just keep going with industrial hemp or calling it IH? I am doing that in a lot of my correspondence, and then people are like, well, what is this IH? And then I can kind of break through it. But I welcome people thinking about that. But I think we need to, drive the fact that this is a commodity no different than corn or soy.
Right. Well, so we started talking about Malawi, and then you said you went to Rwanda. So how do those two countries differ in their hemp industries? What are the similarities?
So they are both countries that have advanced hemp legislation. And Malawi is, it's like a two sides of a coin. Malawi is one side of that coin and has all of its challenges. Rwanda is an amazing country. It is so far advanced. It is, the president has really mandated that they, as a country, are going to be open to opportunities. And Eric, within 36 hours of us landing in Rwanda and us working with the Rwanda Development Board, they looked at the one sheet that we present that kind of identifies the $15 trillion total addressable market that hemp can compete in. And we've kind of categorized it in 8 different areas. Their deputy CEO focused on plant-based solutions. And she said, what we'd like to do is start a pilot program with hemp protein. And they wanted me to meet with the CEO of a food processor. And ironically, had a meeting with that CEO within 2 hours of meeting with them. He was flabbergasted when he was looking at the nutritional profile of hemp oil, and hemp protein. And he immediately sent those to his team, and we had a discussion, and already there is that opportunity. This is a group that processes 650 tons of grain a month. And they're 25% owned by the Rwanda government. The rest is privately held, and they are the largest supplier to both Rwanda children, but also the World Food Program of nutritional goods. And they are confronted right now with a problem in getting enough soy and soy oil. And all of a sudden, when this CEO saw that hemp was an oil seed, he was flabbergasted. So we have already set up meetings with Victory Hemp and the Rwanda Development Group and this company. Those discussions are happening this week. We're going to undertake a pilot program. But as is always a wrinkle, and again, I go back to the purpose of me being there and the funding that we've received from USDA. I've already reported back to them, although our report is not due until the end of this year, but we can't stop. The biggest hurdle to this becoming a real live export for the United States is that the World Food Program and USAID does not include hemp as part of their ingredients list. So at the end of the day, if this company can produce high protein, hemp-based nutritional products, unless the World Food Program and unless USAID changes their ingredients list and adds it on, it's all for naught. And ironically, I did not think that that was one of the barriers that I would have to get over. And while I was in Rwanda, I attended the African Food Security Summit. I probably met with 20 or 30 agriculture ministers and leaders in the space from countries all over Africa. I participated in a couple of panel discussions about emerging markets, new products, new commodities, and not getting over the hurdle about what hemp is and what it isn't. I actually had people from the World USDA on panels with me. They had no idea that hemp was a grain. I met people from the US State Department who are responsible for food security. I went to an event, and on my name tag, it said, "My name is Geoff, ask me about," and I wrote hemp. And so people from the State Department, deputy directors, came to me and they said, "Are you telling me that hemp is a grain?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They said, "We had no idea." So we have a lot of work to do. But I was there to identify barriers. There's one of them. Our own government doesn't know.
What podcasts are these people listening to, Geoff?
Yeah, exactly. You know what? I have to send them a couple links to, let's see, what's that one guy's name? Eric Herlock. You've ever heard of him?
So I get that the USDA wants to have, exports for our goods here. Are there other reasons that the USDA is interested in having strong hemp industries in Africa?
Well, we as taxpayers invest in a whole bunch of money in advancing one of the biggest pressing issues that's in Africa, which is food security.
Right.
So hemp can be part of that solution. But I also think that there are other programs that most people have never heard of, Food for Peace and others, where we are making investments with food into those countries that are our allies, or countries that are advancing democracy. And certainly, it's horrible to think that we're using food for that. But I know that those are programs that are very important. Food for Peace goes through the Farm Bill, through USDA, and then to USDA. I am trying to ensure that when it stops at USDA, that there is language put in there that part of this funding must be used to advance American hemp. So there are different ways to approach this, and I'm trying. But the other thing, Eric, I have been very fortunate that for whatever reason, I've met people along the way. I've developed a great relationship with the CEO of Afra-Exim Bank. Afra-Exim Bank is the former Africa Import-Export Bank, started by 12 treasuries 30 years ago. It is one of the biggest drivers of industry in Africa and policies. Professor Orama, Benedict Orama, is the CEO of that company, and he's a former, I guess he's still a PhD in agriculture from Nigeria. He knows that hemp can be part of that solution. So he has welcomed me on numerous events. I spoke at their annual general meeting in Nassau earlier this year. Met through him presidents of Nigeria and others who really want to look at hemp as being part of the solution. Introduced me to Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, who is involved in cement industry and trucking company industry, is the largest importer of wheat into Nigeria, U.S. wheat into Nigeria. The man is just this incredible entrepreneur, just built the largest oil refinery in Africa, if not the world, with his own money.
Okay.
So those are people that we're starting to align with that can help us advance American technology, American know-how in Africa.
All right. It's all about relationships.
Yeah.
You mentioned that ingredient list, for the export-import thing. What are the steps to get hemp added to that list?
Well, and I immediately came home and worked with my, associates that are in USDA, Greg Jaffe, who is the senior policy advisor to Secretary And then I went to the Foreign Agricultural Service people. I went to people in the White House and said, okay, what is that process? There is a process, believe it or not. It is a somewhat long process to get something added.
Is it anything like the AFCO process?
It
Because
is somewhat like it, but the reality is that I have used the 2018 grass status report that came out of the FTA to say we don't need to go through this process, folks.
yeah,
Let's step on this. This is a real opportunity. And again, this is what these programs are for. And I know that there have been other groups that have been out there with that money. I'd wonder why they don't know this is a bit of a barrier. But this is a significant barrier to us, getting American-grown hemp into their programs. And these, certainly Cindy McCain, whose husband John helped me advance language for the 2018 Farm Bill to ensure that tribal councils and territories were included. So I have a relationship with Cindy, not only through that, but also through her past life as a race car driver. And certainly I have been reaching out to her team to say, let's get this done. The UN General Assembly meetings are next week, so I'm going to have more meetings to advance this. It shouldn't be rocket science, but, bureaucracy. The lovely thing about Cindy McCain is that she takes no prisoners. She's kind of like me, a little rough around the edges and like, let's get this done. Because at the end of the day, both she and I have goals of, helping doing something different for the world. So, Cindy, I know will align with me to say, well, what's the big deal? And so I hope that she'll be able to help put some metal on the pedal and get it done.
all right. Well, keep me in the loop on that. Let me know how that progresses. Okay.
Oh, you'll see the fireworks. Fireworks usually, start before we get it finished, but we'll get it across the finish line.
All right. So, starting to wrap up a little bit, what are some of the bright spots in hemp from your perspective as we, start to head towards the end of the year?
Eric, as you alluded to at the beginning of this, you and I started this so many years ago. I love the fact that I go to events, whether it be the Hemp Field Day or I travel across this country, and I'm now running into people who are, starting to invest in our industry, who I don't know, where I used to know everybody that was in this space. So it tells me that there is growing interest. The simple fact that we're now starting to see alignments with the American Farm Bureau and others. They've now asked us to participate in their annual gathering next year in Texas. They see the value in what we're doing. Farmers are starting to look for alternatives. And if we can make it simple for them, we're going to really start. We're also working with those end users. And I'll have some breaking news in a couple of weeks about the way we can continue to educate and elevate the discussion about industrial hemp and the opportunities. But our work is not done. We have much work to do. I think that for the next 5 years, we'll still be advancing research. But the great thing is that there are groups out there that are doing that heavy lift, that are doing what government requires, to make sure that this is a safe commodity. For the University of Malawi, the agricultural school, to be advancing hemp for fish feed and others, we can bring those alignments together. We know that there is a sushi project that Erica, our executive director, is involved in, which is a USDA climate smart commodities initiative. I see that there are lots of collaborations that are coming together. And listen, when I hear the excitement about the potential of hemp protein being used to create human plasma, I'm like, right. This is amazing. And who knew? I certainly didn't know that, but we need to make sure that all of those opportunities are at least, dragged out to the very end or to reality. And I just find it terribly exciting. It's good times.
Cool. All right. Well, Geoff, I really appreciate talking to you, and I appreciate the work you're doing out in the world. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, just remember the goodness of hemp.
The goodness of hemp. Amen to that, brother. All right. That's the show today. Thanks for listening. It's time to get out of here. My name is Eric Herlock. I'm the senior digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Prove me wrong. Seriously. Send me an email, podcast@lancasterfarming.com. Seriously, if you have questions or comments or whatever, hit me up. All right, I think that's it. Seriously, gotta go. Until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written, recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.